Welcome to part 2 of the video on strategies to integrate sources into your research writing. And today we're going to be talking about paraphrasing. Now, we're all familiar with quotations, using quotations in your paper. Direct quotations. This is taking text from the source material and putting it into your paper in the exact way it appeared in the original source, and putting double quotes around it. That direct quote must match the source document word for word and, of course, be attributed to that author. But I want to talk about a second method of integrating sources into your paper that goes beyond just quotations, because lots of research shows that professors, instructors really dislike student papers that have an over-reliance on quotations. In extreme examples, students have quotation after quotation after quotation, put a couple sentences in between all those quotations, and try and turn that in as a paper. And oftentimes, grades will suffer because of that method. So, paraphrasing involves taking source material, a passage of that material, or an idea behind it, or a summary of that source material in some way, and putting it into your own words. Now, just because you put it into your own words, you still also must cite it. You must attribute who that idea or summary or information came from. In addition, paraphrasing is usually, not always, usually shorter than the original passage. It involves taking a segment of the source and usually condensing it so that it meets the needs within your own paper. Now, as far as how to actually paraphrase, we get into a little bit of gray area here, but in general, you need to go beyond just changing some of the words. You need to restructure and rewrite that source material as completely as possible. That is what we mean by putting it in your own words. It's not just changing a couple words to your own. It means rewriting the entire thing in your own words, the entire passage that you're going to be used or idea. Now, this starts really with smart note-taking habits. Instead of, for example, reading a textbook or an article and highlighting important passages, instead, write in the margins or keep a notebook or keep a Word document where you summarize the main ideas or the quotes you might think of using later in the paper, and summarize those in your own words rather than just relying on that highlighting. If you do that, you'll be a leg up when it comes to actually sitting down and writing the paper, because you will have done some of that paraphrasing yourself. And the real advantage to doing paraphrasing is that it shows your instructor, your professor, that you're really interacting with the source materials. You're not just, anyone can do a copy and paste of some quotes and plug it into a paper. But if you take that extra effort to put it into your own words, it shows your instructors that you're actually, grappling with the source materials, that you're learning. And that will, ideally, affect your grades in a positive way. So, let's take a look at some examples. So right now I'm showing an original passage from a book by Lester James called Writing Research Papers. And it states, students frequently overuse direct quotation in taking notes, and as a result, they overuse quotations in the final research paper. Probably only about 10% of your final manuscript should appear as directly quoted matter. Therefore, you should strive to limit the amount of exact transcribing of source materials while taking notes. Okay, so let's look at some paraphrasing of parts or a summary of this passage. First one, and this also, by the way, uses the signal phrasing, the in-text citation method from the first video. So this states, Lester, 1976, argues that in research papers, students often quote excessively, failing to keep quoted material down to a desired level, perhaps closer to 10%, pages 46 and 47. Now, another example, and as you can see from these examples, paraphrasing is really an art form. It's a writing technique. It's not an exact science. So in the second example, again uses that in-text citation method. Lester, 1976, suggests that students should take just a few notes in direct quotation from sources to help minimize the amount of quoted material in a research paper, pages 46 and 47. Now let's also look at one that would be considered a plagiarism. If you don't change the material enough, even if you cite it, it can be considered plagiarism. And this scares some students off, but don't be scared by it. It's just a matter of, again, going back to that note-taking and really, reading the material closely. So in this plagiarized version, it says, Lester, 1976, suggests that students often use too many direct quotations when they take notes, resulting in too many of them in the final research paper. In fact, probably only about 10% of the final copy should consist of directly quoted material. So it is important to limit the amount of source material copied while taking notes, pages 46 and 47. So, why do you think that last example would be considered plagiarism? And if you want, pause here and write something down. So the answer is that while it changes a bunch of the words, it still uses the overall structure of the original passage. And in most professors' eyes, that is not enough. You need to, like in the two previous examples, condense, summarize, and change completely the structure. Now, certainly something like the 10%, that number, you don't need to change that. That's a statistic. But everything around it you want to change. So that is paraphrasing in a nutshell.